I keep having these nightmares lately. They just seem to never stop. It's always that damn monkey. I hate him! I hate him! I hate that monkey! Why does he never stop with the monkey? Why does he never stop with the monkey? I hate him! Get him out of here! Get him out of here! Get him out of here! Why? 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 Stupid! It's fucking stupid! It's a stupid monkey! It's a stupid monkey! I hate him! I hate him! I hate him!
Hello everyone. Today's video was going to be a fictionalised depiction of a nightmare, and I had this whole idea planned, but the more I thought about it, and with recent events, I thought it'd be more interesting to have a conversation with you about nightmares, because I had a friend from work come up to me a few weeks ago and say, "Scott, as embarrassing as this is to say, I had a nightmare the other night." And we spoke about it, but the most intriguing part about this whole thing was that they were embarrassed to have a nightmare because they felt like they were too old. And it made me think, are you ever too old to have a nightmare? Where is that cut-off point? What determines that? And should we be embarrassed by nightmares? I think if you've ever had a dream, which chances are if you've lived long enough, you have had a dream, you've probably had a nightmare. And some people say that they don't really remember dreams, and some people do. I would say, sometimes I remember dreams, sometimes I don't. But nightmares are really interesting because it exposes something that we might not have been thinking about. When I was a lot younger, I had this recurring nightmare about being trapped in the sewers. Not even really trapped, I was just exploring it. But I would have this nightmare over and over again, and I don't really know why. I wasn't in a sewer at any point. This was very much just my mind's way of making it up. And I always wondered, what was that about? Why was I fearful of whatever happened in this sewer? I felt like I was running out of time in there. I also had that classic dream where you felt like you were falling, and that was more interesting to me because it was specifically at a shopping centre that my family used to go to in York. And I just remember thinking, oh, that's like, why there? Why was I feeling like I was falling there? What was going on? I think nightmares when you're younger are interesting because it's very much based on these larger than life experiences. It's like, oh, I'm falling and I can't fly myself to safety, or I'm trapped in a sewer. Some people also fear monsters. I never really had anything like that. Although, if you remember Crazy Frog, I remember having a nightmare about him once. My cousin had a nightmare about Lego Indiana Jones. It was a whole thing. But I don't think I really ever had a nightmare about monsters. And maybe that's just me, maybe it is a younger child thing. But when you get to a certain age, your nightmares shift away from these random things and become a bit more within the realm of reality. I had a lot of weird dreams and nightmares, and we'll talk about that. But if I've ever seen a film perfectly articulate what it feels like to have a nightmare at any age, it's Beau is Afraid. And admittedly, I made fun of this title before seeing the film. I saw the film in the cinema when it came out, and I made fun of the title because like, Beau is Afraid. What sort of horror film is called that? That's like calling a action film Scott Will Punch People, which in fairness would get me in the seat because I'd be like, I've never punched a person in my life, I want to see this film. But Beau is Afraid, why would you call your film that? But then I saw the film and I thought to myself, there is not a single better title you could call this film than Beau is Afraid, because it articulates all sorts of fears. I actually believe if you have a fear of something, chances are it will be represented in this film in some way. It does such a good job of just explaining fears without actually explaining it and making you have that experience and it feel like a nightmare. Nothing gets explained, there's just random things going on in the background. Within the first 5 minutes of the film, there is a great scene where you just see like all the things that Bo could possibly be afraid of, and there's like a guy just selling guns on the street, and then like some like random person that Bo thinks is going to kill him. It's a really great depiction of a fear, and I'm surprised I don't see a lot of people talk about that aspect of the film. But honestly, it feels like it's been a bit forgotten. But when I watched that film, I felt seen in a lot of ways with some of the things that maybe I am afraid of in my real life, but certainly what it feels like to have a nightmare. So when you dream, you don't really know what's going on. Like sometimes I dream and I think, well, hold on, I know I'm dreaming, but other times I'm just wrapped up in it. Recently I had a dream and I was mortified by what was going on. I actually would call this a nightmare, even though it was very low stakes, where I was having this argument with my mum, and I remember getting a text from her in the dream saying, please can we just not fight for 5 minutes, and feeling so guilty about that. I remember thinking, I am a terrible son for this. And I was so thankful when I woke up and was like, oh, thank goodness, none of that happened. That was all just in my head. I also used to have this dream about driving. As a little fact about myself, when I first started driving, I had a accident on the road. It was completely my fault. And for years, I was terrified about that. It wasn't a serious accident, but it was the fact that it was all my fault that it happened, and the situation that occurred after it and how I had lost control. I tend to be afraid of losing control of myself. I'm not a controlling person of other people, at least I don't think so. But when I'm not in control of myself, I tend to feel very anxious. So the nightmares that I would have for about 9-10 years would be about me driving and basically having another accident and not wanting to face the consequences of that and continuing to drive until eventually I found myself in a terrible situation. And every time I would have that nightmare, I would just be relieved that it didn't happen, but concerned that I was still having nightmares about that. Now, I am happy to say I have not had that nightmare in about a year and a half, maybe 2 years actually. I need to think about it. And it was thanks to doing a therapy technique known as EMDR. And I won't get into that, but it was something that I was sceptical about, but something I was like, you know what? Willing to try it, willing to see if it helps, and it did. It actually did. So I can't promise it'll work for everyone, but if there is things like that you've experienced where you do have that lingering trauma that is hanging on, and believe me, with the next thing that I'll talk about, it's something that I still need to explore and continue that path. I would maybe recommend looking into, like, hey, is this for me? Can't promise it'll work. Maybe you'll be skeptical like I was, but I was surprised by how much I was able to move on to a point where I used to be terrified of driving, and I would sit in my car for 10 minutes after the fact and just breathe. But then after this, I was able to just get up and go. And I was really very proud of myself for that. But the nightmares that I tend to have these days, beyond, random other things, happens to be about my ex. And I've discussed it before on Never Scottis, and I'm going to be vulnerable here for a moment as we wrap up this video. But I have only had one relationship. I've been on dates with other people, but this would be the first serious relationship that I ever had, and it did not go well. I actually tried to leave this relationship once before, and finally making it out about a year after that, but I failed. So whenever I have nightmares about this bad relationship, I tend to imagine myself back in that situation where I end up going back into that relationship. And sometimes I have that out of body experience where I know it's a dream and I'm begging the Scott that is experiencing these things to get out and run away. But other times I'm living it and just feeling mortified, feeling trapped. And I think when you have things like that, you do just wonder, how do I get over this? Why am I still experiencing this? It's been 4 years. I've not ended up back in a relationship. The awake Scott knows that's a bad idea. But why can't I escape that? Why is Beau is Afraid so meaningful to me? When you get to the end of the film, you'll see a scene where something not similar to my experience, but similar to that idea that you are begging and you can't escape. And that's happened a lot in my dreams with my ex. I will get into a position where I am begging her to stop something and it doesn't happen. The interesting thing about dreams and nightmares, and the sorts of dreams and nightmares you have when you're young and the sorts of dreams and nightmares you have when you're older, is in my case, the nightmares I have are things that have happened and have just been put to an extreme degree. And when you're young, it's all fictional. It's almost implying that when you get older, the horrors of life start to take effect and take hold. As I've said, I was in a situation with my therapist where I was only able to tackle one of my problems I was having. I didn't really get to use this EMDR technique to get over the both awake and asleep experience of my ex and the lingering effects that she has caused. But that wasn't anything to do with the therapist. It was more just I had to leave and I was moving and all sorts of things. But what I will say is it's something that I do need to explore still, because I'm still having these nightmares. I have been out of that relationship for about 4 years, and I was having the nightmares in the relationship as well, and feeling that fear. So if any of this made any sense to you, I know this is a very out of nowhere conversation, and maybe if I were to watch this back, I'd be like, this made no sense at all. But if any of it resonated with you, I hope you got something from it. Hopefully it caused a conversation in yourself to be like, why do we have nightmares? I think there's a whole lot of discussion about dreams and why we dream and what dreams mean. Never let anyone tell you, by the way, whether it be dreams or nightmares, why do I care? This isn't real. This all happened in your head. Dreams are interesting. I think it's always fun to dissect a dream, because what is it? It's just your brain trying to take information and move it somewhere else. So I hope you've enjoyed this nightmare discussion, and for the rest of the day I'm just going to be thinking about nightmares and what it could mean, and not in a weird way of like, oh, I'm afraid of them. But just the more you understand something, the less scary it becomes. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.